Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are running the Radeon RX 5600 XT through more than 30 gaming titles for the first time, and I thought it'd be interesting for this comparison if we compared the results with older Pascal-based GPUs such as the GTX 1070 and 1060. The RTX 2060 Super and RX 5700 XT will also be included since I already have most of that data, but absent from this test will be the standard 6GB RTX 2060. I'll probably add that soon for a different content piece. For this one, I want to see what kind of upgrade the 5600 XT offers over the GTX 1060 when testing a huge range of games, and this will also give RX 580 owners a good idea of how much faster the 5600 XT is, as we found last year when testing 38 titles that the 5800 was just 2 to 3% faster than the 1060 on average. And that's probably another GPU battle I'll revisit shortly, but for today, the focus is on the 5600 XT versus the GTX 1060. But before we get on with that GPU battle, today's video is sponsored by PC Case Gear, Australia's premier online PC store. Whenever I'm in the need for a product, they're the first place I turn to, and I've been a customer of theirs for years now, so I really can attest to the quality of their service. I value their broad product range, competitive pricing, customer support, and easy to navigate website. With 2 decades of experience, I know I can trust PC Case Gear to look after you guys as well as they look after me. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so the GTX 1060 6GB was introduced at the $250 US price point back in July of 2016, so 3.5 years ago now. The version used here for testing is technically a $300 model, as it packs the updated 9GB per second GDDR5 memory, though it should be noted this memory upgrade only offered a very minor performance gain of 3 to 4%. So there really isn't much in it, and the results here will be representative of the more premium GTX 1060 models, which were priced around $270 to $290 US upon release. Recently, we found for about the same price at launch, the 5700 XT was about 50% faster than the GTX 1070, so I'm interested to see if the 5600 XT can offer similar gains over the GTX 1060. As I said, it's been around 3.5 years since the GTX 1060 was released, so you'd be hoping for at least a 50% improvement. Representing the GTX 1060 is MSI's Gaming X Plus model, and for the GTX 1070 we also have the MSI Gaming X version, and both will be going head to head with MSI's RX 5600 XT Gaming X model. Also, please note, MSI hasn't sponsored this content, it just worked out this way. They've provided us with a lot of cards over the years, so that's why I'm using the Gaming X cards. I did overlook their Gaming X version of the 5700 XT because I got my hands on the Power Color Red Devil first, and it really impressed me, so I've been using it ever since. So moving on, powering the GPU test rig is the Intel Core i9 9900K overclocked to 5GHz with 16GB of DDR4 3400 memory. As usual, rather than go over all 32 graphs here, we'll look at around a dozen closely and then jump into the performance breakdown graphs. Finally, for those of you who want all the results for all 32 games, please visit our Patreon page where you can find them for free. Okay, let's get into it. First up, we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and here the 5600 XT is only able to match the GTX 1070, which isn't a terrible result given the GeForce GPU cost at least $100 US more upon release, but it was also released 3.5 years ago. So we see that matching the GTX 1070 meant that the 5600 XT was 26% faster than the 1060 at 1080p and 31% faster at 1440p. So not exactly impressive gains there. Hopefully these numbers will grow a little bit more substantial in the other titles we have to look at. Here we again see that the 5600 XT is only able to match the GTX 1070, this time while testing with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. That meant it was just 31% faster than the GTX 1060 at 1080p, though that margin did grow to 43% at 1440p. So at least in this title, the 5600 XT is significantly more capable at this higher resolution. The Outer Worlds uses the Unreal Engine, and since this game engine has been optimized for Nvidia hardware, the 5600 XT doesn't fare all that well against the GTX 1070, falling short by around 7 to 8% at both tested resolutions. That makes the new Radeon GPU a pretty weak upgrade for GTX 1060 owners in this title, just a 21% gain at 1080p and 25% at 1440p. Okay, so here we have our first example of the 5600 XT easily outperforming the GTX 1070. Here it was 15% faster at 1080p and 16% faster at 1440p. This meant it was almost 50% faster than the GTX 1060 at 1080p and 55% faster at 1440p. So that is a solid performance uplift and would certainly warrant the upgrade. The Red Dead Redemption 2 results are interesting, and here we see the first bit of real trouble for the 6GB 5600 XT. The frame time performance at 1080p wasn't great, and we see a very large disparity between the 1% low and average frame rate. A similar problem was also seen with the GTX 1060, another 6GB model. The problem is amplified at 1440p. Here the 5600 XT sees 1% lows dip to 22 FPS, around 3 times lower than that of the 5700 XT. The 5600 XT was also just 28% faster than the GTX 1060, though it's fair to say neither delivered satisfactory performance at 1440p. Here we see the 5600 XT was 20% faster than the GTX 1070 in control at 1080p, though both delivered very similar 1% low performance. Still, that meant the Navi-based GPU was between 41 and 65% faster than the GTX 1060, so a rather significant performance uplift there. The margins were very similar at both 1080p and 1440p. The 5600 XT performed well when testing with World War Z. Here it was 19% faster than the GTX 1070 at 1080p, and that meant it was 60% faster than the GTX 1060. That said, the old $250 Pascal GPU had no trouble delivering playable performance at 1080p. It did struggle a little at 1440p, though 56 FPS on average with 48 FPS for the 1% low is still very playable, but for up to 70% more performance, the 5600 XT is a nice upgrade. F1 2019 is another title where the 5600 XT performed really well. Here it outpaced the GTX 1070 by a 20% margin at 1080p. This allowed the Radeon GPU to deliver almost 70% more frames than the GTX 1060, so a massive upgrade for F1 fans. We also see that the margins were much the same at 1440p. For testing with Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, I've updated to the Vulkan API, and here the 5600 XT was 10% faster than the GTX 1070, and that meant it was 55% faster than the GTX 1060. The same 55% performance gain was seen at 1440p, and here the result is much more significant as it took us from 56 FPS on average to 87 FPS. Fortnite's also been tested with its updated API mode, DirectX 12 in this case, and again the 5600 XT outpaced the GTX 1070, though this time by just a 6% margin. But by beating the 1070, that meant it was a good bit faster than the 1060. Here it can be seen boosting frame rates by 51% at 1080p. Again though, it's the boost from 50 FPS on average to 77 FPS at 1440p that will be the most noticeable. Here we're looking at a whopping 54% increase in performance. The margins seen in Gears 5 were similar to that of the past few games that we've looked at. Here the 5600 XT edged ahead of the GTX 1070 to beat the 1060 by a rather convincing 48% margin at 1080p and 49% at 1440p, so near enough to 50% faster in this title. Typically, the Radeon GPUs do perform really well in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and the 5600 XT is no exception. Here it was 55% faster than the GTX 1060 at 1080p and 53% faster at 1440p, so solid gains are seen across the board here. Our Apex Legends Season 4 testing shows the 5600 XT matching the GTX 1070 at 1080p, but beating it by a 14% margin at 1440p, which is rather interesting. The GTX 1060 also performed surprisingly well at 1080p. The 5600 XT was just 28% faster, though that margin was extended out to 44% at 1440p. And the last set of results I'm going to discuss in detail are those from Borderlands 3, and here we see very strong performance from the 5600 XT. At 1080p, it crushed the GTX 1060 by a 62% margin, and then almost a 70% margin can be seen at 1440p. So some really nice performance gains in this title for the new Radeon GPU. Okay, so that's how the 5600 XT compared to the older Pascal GPUs, and I have to say for GTX 1060 owners, it looks like it could be a decent upgrade, but for those of you with a GTX 1070 that's been holding out for a cheap upgrade, doesn't look like the 5600 XT will offer you much in the way of an upgrade. Anyway, we've discussed the results for 14 of the 32 games tested, so here's a look at the average performance across all the games, and then we'll do a head-to-head comparison between the 5600 XT and the GTX 1060. Okay, so here we see that on average, the 5600 XT was just 8% faster than the GTX 1070 at 1080p, so not a viable upgrade for owners of the $400-ish Pascal GPU, but probably no surprises there. However, when compared to the GTX 1060, we're looking at a 47% performance increase, and that's pretty substantial. Also, when compared to the $250 base model 1060s, you'd be looking at just over a 50% performance increase on average. And the margins are basically identical at 1440p as well. However, if we look at the results on a per game basis, we see that while the 5600 XT is around 50% faster on average, the results vary quite significantly from game to game. The Ghost Recon Breakpoint results are a massive outlier here. I actually went back and retested that title, but for whatever reason, the 5600 XT just doesn't perform very well here. Your first thought might be, oh, this is just a driver issue, but the 5700 XT easily beats the RTX 2060 Super, so perhaps this is just some kind of memory limitation. There are 8 titles where the 5600 XT was faster by a 60% margin or greater, with another 8 titles where it was only faster by a 31% margin or less, and that excludes Breakpoint as that was an extreme outlier. So if you predominantly play, say, PUBG for example, the upgrade from the GTX 1060 to the 5600 XT just won't be worth it. You'd be better off looking at the RTX 2060 for example. Again, the margins are very similar at 1440p, though overall the 5600 XT does fare a little bit better in its battle with the GTX 1060 at this slightly higher resolution. Well, there you have it. The 5600 XT is around 50% faster than the GTX 1060, and that makes it a pretty solid upgrade choice. Again, assuming you play a wide range of games and not just a single title such as PUBG. Now, base model GTX 1060s, they were available at $250 US, though models such as the MSI Gaming X Plus, which we used for this video here, they were priced around $300. Realistically though, you could achieve this level of performance, or a very similar level of performance, around $270 to $280. So a similar price to that of base model 5600 XTs. So if you were to say a quality 1060 would have set you back around $270 3 years ago, that would make the 5600 XT around 7 to 10% more expensive. And I'm thinking about a comparison here with the Sapphire Pulse version, for example, which typically sells for about $10 over the MSRP. Or if we were to compare just MSRPs, so $250 for the 1060 and then $280 for the 5600 XT, that means the Radeon GPU comes out about 12% more expensive. So let's go with that as a worst case scenario. And that means after about 3.5 years, you're looking at about a 50% performance increase for a 12% increase in price. So certainly not amazing, but it's not terrible either given the lack of competition that took place during that time. The problem the 5600 XT faces when it comes to the value equation is the same problem every sub $300 GPU has had over the past year or so, and that's those heavily discounted RX 580s. Upon the 5600 XT's release, you could buy an 8GB 580 for just $180, and now they're down to $170, with some models bottoming out at just $160. If we assume the RX 580 and GTX 1060 are still neck and neck, that would mean although the 5600 XT is about 50% faster than the 580, it also costs at least 55% more. So in terms of cost per frame, we've been stuck in a sort of limbo for years now, and if anything, we've seen a slight value regression. But if we focus on raw performance, the 5600 XT is quite impressive in terms of value, given it is a few tiers above the RX 580. We're probably looking more at Vega 56 type performance, as Vega 56 was around 10% faster than the GTX 1070, at least last I tested. Vega 56, that came in at around $400 US. It was priced well above that for many months after release, but let's just say it's a $400 US part as that was the MSRP, and that makes the 5600 XT a good bit cheaper, and it also offers quite a few other advantages, such as using a lot less power. So that is a pretty good step forward for AMD in a 2-year time frame. The hope is, at this point anyway, that AMD can continue to become more competitive across the board, and this will help drive GPU prices down. We saw years of stagnation on the CPU front when AMD had absolutely nothing, and we're looking at a similar result over the past few years with GPUs. Not quite as bad as what we saw with CPUs, but a similar sort of thing. So hopefully Radeon can have its Ryzen moment in the not too distant future. And that is going to do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed the benchmarks and the look back at the GTX 1060 and how it compares to the 5600 XT. And as promised, I will be updating quite a few GPU comparisons. So we'll probably look at the 580 versus 1060 if that's something a lot of you request down below. I'll also add the RTX 2060 to this big 30 plus game set of results. And there's probably a few other comparisons we make in there. I'm sure a lot of you are very keen for Vega 56 to be revisited. I've started seeing a lot of those sort of comments. So yeah, anyway, let me know what you'd like me to do next, and I'll make sure I do it. And just lastly, we have our Patreon account. If you're interested in becoming part of the Hardware Unboxed community, you get access to our monthly live stream, Discord chat, Q&As, and a few other cool perks. So if you're interested in that, links in the video description. You can go and check it all out. But above all else, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.